Hello and most welcome to 934, and I will today addressing limits on knowledge. And this is one of the most difficult takes to have, but it is a very good take to do, because after that deconstruction will open up in a very decisive manner. It will after that be much easier to understand deconstruction, because one of the greatest limits on the understanding of deconstruction is the limitation on knowledge, and that is very similar to how Heidegger always wished to understand paraconsistent logic, and he sort of made a preamble to understanding it by doing his crossing over of Dasein. Sorry, I was a little low on blood sugar here. Let's see if we can get a better angle here. How can I explain it? Think about the Gödelian theorem. The Gödelian theorem shows us that a system like mathematics cannot be both consistent and coherent. And that means the rules for the system cannot come from within the system. This, to understand deconstruction, could be reversed. So, that is to say, how the world works, or rather, how rationality works, if we say rationality in a very general term. The rules for rationality cannot be defined within rationality, and also rationality cannot be projected to the whole world. This is similar, but a reverse of what happened within mathematics. We wanted to find rules that govern mathematics within the very system of mathematics, and that is impossible. The opposite cannot be done either, although we constantly try to do it, and that is to apply the rules of rationality to rationality itself and to other means. So we like to see that logic explains itself and thinking explains itself. That's a grave mistake. And this is, of course, related to the idea that rationality is not man-made. It has always been there. It's eternal. And this is the reason for the search for the now. Because it's only in the now that we can have a monosemic take. This monosemic take is important. Otherwise, we cannot have coherence, correspondence, consistency. We need to stop meaning. We cannot have undecidabilities. So look out for this reasoning which follows now. And this is coming from linguistics. And listen very carefully. They're usually saying a word context, the sentence can have many different meanings. But at any singular moment, specific moment, could be extremely short, it has only one meaning. This you need to say no to. Definitely need to say no to that, because that is a sort of unspoken premise. I heard it spoken, but it's within the Gestalt, and we normally assumed it, so that it would be legit to constantly ask the question, what did you mean? Or what did they mean? Or what does the book mean? And so forth. That does not hold. You need strongly to reject that notion of the idea that meaning at some particular moment can be sort of fixed. It's a trickery, so to speak, of logocentrism to suggest such a thing. This is of course also what Noam Chomsky says. This is the foundation of analytical philosophy. No one will ever say that a meaning is fixed all over the time, no matter context. That would just be too ridiculous. But there is a striving of centeredness, and this is called centeredness, and that is the idea that in a specific moment, if even that moment is possible, there could be only one meaning. And this is, I would say, foundational for how our Western Gestalt works. And you get sort of picture, if time were to stop, it could be possible that in that specific microsecond, it was only one meaning that was valid. A little bit like when we look at the Necker cube, we Westerners, we can only see one side. But show it to someone else, coming maybe from the Orient, they would see both at the same time. We sort of dispel that notion early on. We said it to be an impossibility. That cannot be the case. It cannot be, and it should be expelled. And this shows the point why bringing in experience is absolutely vital. Nothing in deconstruction means anything if it's just concepts. It is grounded in something much more fantastic than analytical philosophy, which is just an arrangement of words. And for every new analytical philosophy strain or subject like linguistic, anthropology, there is a renaming process. So it's a changing of concepts, but the centeredness remain. And this is why deconstruction is so absolutely vital, because centeredness is the reading of oneself. This is the closing off of the box. This is confirming one's own concept And we are constantly being educated these days that that's the perfect world, where you make yourself self-affirmative. You affirm your own world, and your own world becomes your private universe, but it's a private universe that you cannot understand. And the non-understanding is the token for what is real. It's the world because I cannot understand it. And this is, oddly enough, the very arche of the pre-Socratics. The non-understanding that we're looking for, that was the arche, because it's something you can never ever understand. Someone said water, someone said air, but it's not water or air in the normal sense. It's a specific water you can never feel. It's a water that is before the water. It is the mirror image and the one looking into the image. When they start looking for the ousia, the arche, they looked for the thing that I couldn't perceive, the thing that looked into the mirror. And the most important trait of reality for these pre-Socratics was that it could not be experienced. Otherwise they couldn't go out looking for an eternal, essential centeredness. Maybe this could be contrasted to saying that reality is not a question. It's not a question about reality. The question is why? But the why question had already been obscured as being a no question, and no possibility of that question being put. We had always already started with the what and possibly the where, but not the more important thing. Why does anything exist? And it's not only because that's the more important question. It is you get locked in a specific position and you lose out on all possibilities. This is parallel in some ways to De Bono's plea for not asking what's true, but asking for what. You build something, you invent something, you are going somewhere. For what purpose? For what reason? He wants to have the why into his creative system. He said without a why we were to be eternally locked into the old things. And this is of course also why it's so important to get back to the Necker cube's fluency, where it's constantly shifting. That is what gives the energy. Reality doesn't have an energy in the now, this search now. It cannot stop completely, but you can almost get there, where there is no movement and everything is absolutely stillness, and everything has gazillions of meanings. It is the directionality we should be looking for. Where is it taking us? For what purpose does it serve? And this is a most difficult question. This is the thing that Heidegger never reached when crossing out, and that's the paraconsistent logic. Transfer what I just said with the Necker cube, different takes, the now that sort of locks everything. And now we go into the much more difficult subject of knowledge and see that logic sort of locks everything, but it doesn't lock it in time, doesn't lock it in space. This Loch Ness monster is more about how knowledge lock itself, like it did in the hope of Hilbert in the Paris conference of the year 1900. This is when we cannot accept things because we think one logic is global, so to speak, it's universal, it underpins everything and it's everywhere. I'm using spatial references here, but this is actually knowledge rather than speciality. This is knowledge. It's important to understand. And I would say this is probably the most difficult subject of them all. Space was difficult, time was more difficult, knowledge is even more. But I think some hints are, it also takes now in some sense, different take on now, not that one that we usually mentions. It takes here in some way, because this logic that constricts doesn't tell where it is in time or space. What do I mean by that? Well, this is a very good lead, because logic doesn't have a history. And what I am inferring that logic should have a history. I am just like Graham Priest in this circumstance. Logic was developed. And this is something I myself experienced when I started to read classical logic, that they obviously tried to cover up the very fact that it wasn't classical. That is rather mean, I would say. And it surprised me that people could go to that complete dishonesty. Classical logic did not exist before the year 1910, or at least, or even 1920. It's a completely modern construction. What they possibly, in their dishonesty, could have meant was that this was the true logic of the Greek people. But that makes the whole case even worse. Who are they to say what the Greek should have thought when they never thought it? It is the idea of an eternal logic with no origin in time. For us, it is very important to keep logic above everything else. It should not be tainted by history, shouldn't have a history, should be an unborn child, as I mentioned before. These are very important traits for the existence of this true or truer logic. It is that it doesn't have a time. I mentioned before the Declaration of Human Rights. We just proposed that, hypothesized that. How could we be so ignorant? How could we be so colonial in some terms, many people have said, towards other countries, like the Eastern countries, like Singapore, who couldn't accept more than half of the propositions in the Declaration of Human Rights? Because it is not formulated in an eternal, universal language. A thing that doesn't have a place nor a time. It is timeless and placeless, and therefore the constructors of the Declaration of Human Rights thought they were in absolute right to construct it, because it was shared by everyone in the universe. I wouldn't say everyone in the earth, I would say universe. Why made them do that mistake? Obviously, the timelessness. if we were to say the law of excluded middle came about, maybe, I don't think it was actually constructed by one single person, I wouldn't say that, but we can actually put it in a historical context. It did not exist before the year 500 BC, and it came to existence from Greece and nowhere else. This is where it started. Now it has a birthplace, now it has a time, now it has in some sense parents, and that's defiling. All of my professors in logic and most of the doctorates would say that's defiling logic. This is what Bishop wanted to do with mathematics, defiling it, drawing it into time and space. And I can actually understand that in some way, because if we take that away, what do we have left? There's nothing divine in that sense that rationality governs everything. And what could govern the world after we are gone? Humanity is eradicated. When the sun's flame has come to earth, what will rule the heavens if not this eternal logic that's there to protect everything? It's rather scary. I can only give suggestions how, for instance, people who do not think this, they do not think east of the Indus that there is a universal logic, and they are very well aware that their all intellectual tools things have a history, and they would even defend that because that goes for a good use. A logic that is made global becomes less of a logic. It is like using the same tool for everything. And this is exactly what Graham Priest wanted to show. Explosion is not a good thing. It handicaps our logic. And the question, what should we have instead? It's not a question. It's not a question. Possibly it could be that in the East Asian world, they say, we accept this to be human-made, but there is something else beyond that, that is beyond concepts, or something like that. This has been suggested by the Advaita and also by the Samkhya. That beyond would be the Purusha. And Purusha is awareness rather than an awareness that takes polarity. But that's just suggestions. I think they could actually help to make it less scary. They could possibly actually be hindrances as well. So I'm not 100% sure it's a good advice for me to think in that area. But see that as a suggestion and just forget about it. It's just me chatting away. But the global take of knowledge, I think, is the most locking mechanism of all. It is never enough to see the centeredness of time, the now, and the centeredness of space, the origo. We need to look at knowledge, and knowledge is without pair, absolutely most difficult. It will come slowly, and this is what I'm trying to do in this, well, what you call the 900 series with the deconstructive take, the deconstructive turn in this series, Dicere. And yes, it's repetitive, I agree. Yes, I've been talking about polarities before and so forth. But remember the 120 episodes of Heidegger. This is important to repeat. It needs to be sitting firmly established so you can do that without thinking almost. Because it is a learning procedure. Knowledge is something you learn. And logic becomes much greater when you understand that this is something you can develop. You can develop your intellectual instruments. and there can be much more. Also that Edvard de Bono suggested, why make do with only one system? He saw it differently. He didn't see the global take as being the most problematic. He said it's a lack of creativity. It hinders new developments with logic. And he's absolutely right. Why hasn't Chattoskoty entered the universities yet, other than in very closed environments? It is not at the logic department at the university in Gothenburg, Stockholm, Lund or Uppsala. And this is a development, and it's completely tragic when these tools that are so good for humanity and so good for the individual, because thinking is not really possible without them. And it is also so that Chattoskoty is something that can constantly develop, whereas in law of the excluded middle there is an absolute stop, and it's an emotional stop. It is almost like a law of the conformism. It is not very healthy. Could put you into the loony bin before you know it. No, the more expanded logic of Graham Priest is just sheer fantastic. The wonders people already done with this logic when it comes to literature, science, mathematics is just beyond belief. And when it will enter Sweden, I don't know. But my guess, we will be the last country on earth that changes to that, because the law of the excluded middle is much more than a religion in Sweden. It's a fanaticism that beats the Cultural Revolution in China. It beats what Stalin said. It beats everything. Everyone in Sweden is following it by heart, and it's part of reality. Because the law of the excluded middle, my teacher used to say, they will actually stay long after human beings left the planet or the universe, which is absolutely ridiculous. Ridiculous beyond belief. And it is a hamper on thinking. It's a hamper on what we can do as human beings. Law of the excluded middle kills off mathematics, and then you can think what it does to the rest of the discourse. It is just an obstacle, and losing it up takes time, it takes training, therefore the repetition. You're not used to do this thing. You're used to lying back and relying on the law of the excluded middle. Don't do that. There are so many great things outside, and you'll be more isolated than a relative to mine who never saw the sea, although she lived about 50 kilometers from it. This is much more. You will exclude wondrous things to be discovered, and you will enhance your absolute quality of intellectuality, because with the law of excluded middle there are only fixated rules, and those rules are only followed by you and no one else. So you're not even breaking them. You are just going to look incredibly smart and creative, because that's what you are. And I think that's as good time as ever as ending off on this sunny, beautiful April's day. Have a very good afternoon, and bye bye for now.